Hello and welcome to the practice edition for today's race weekend's data analysis for the Emilia Romagna Made in Italy Imola Grand Prix, some ridiculously long name. Now, if you're not familiar with this whole race weekend data analysis series, I basically break down and look at all of the data from every practice session, every qualifying session, and also the race in 3 separate episodes. Today is obviously the practice edition. It is coming up to qualifying. It's currently 11:30 at the moment. I think I've got an hour and a half till qualifying starts. Qualifying's episode will come tomorrow, and then the race will come Tuesday sort of time. There's a lot more data crunching that needs to go on with the race one. In the aim for me to mush all of the data together into one big algorithm and produce a driver of the weekend, with the secondary aim to compare my rankings on Sunday post-race to your rankings as well, to see what an algorithm thinks, to see what I think, to see what you guys as the audience think, and see as a comparison as a whole. So without further ado, we will jump on into the race weekend data analysis for Imola and take a look at the practice data. So we will begin with the sessions and jump into practice number 1, which is topped by both Mercedes with Max Verstappen in P3. It was so very close at the top, but it was also a little bit of a hectic session. Lots of incidents, Mazepin spinning twice, for example, one within the first 5 minutes, and then one right at the end of the session as well. Both Haas cars are down in 18th and 19th. Practice 2, again, a Mercedes 1-2. They seem to slip back into their old form, the form that we weren't expecting them to have this season. Gasly in the Alfa Tauri doing a stellar job. Ferrari faster than the Red Bulls, but critically Max Verstappen did have some issues in the Red Bull, hence why he is P14. His engine stopped, he had a drive shaft issue or something like that after riding some exit curbs. However, heading into practice 3, the session which has literally just finished, Max Verstappen dominated. Shodding the red-walled soft tyres, he went 4.5 tenths faster than Norris in the McLaren, ahead of Lewis Hamilton and Sergio Perez, who was 6 tenths down on Max Verstappen. Still hasn't really closed that gap just yet, but bear in mind it is only his second race, so all can be forgiven for the time being. Aston Martin, though, are still struggling. P12 and P14. Otmar Szafnauer is considering legal action against the FIA to get these rules changed to favour the higher raked cars, as he feels it has been unjustly done to hinder the lower raked cars like his Aston Martin. But you don't see Toto Wolff complaining or bitching. He's just getting on with the job and doing an exceptionally good job at it as that. That didn't make any sense whatsoever, but you understood what I mean. But heading back to the data, we can convert all of these times and shove them into a graph, and we can see the progression of each of the drivers. They make considerable progression from FP1 to FP2, bar Max Verstappen, but again, he did have his little issue, so practice data is always a little bit on the iffy side to take. And then there's not so much of a progression at all from FP2 to FP3. Now, these sessions do take part on different days, so there's different track temperature, different settings, etc. that are run, but interesting to see that there wasn't as much progression from FP2 to FP3. And then let's take a look at exactly that. Who progressed the most from FP1 to FP2? That was actually Haas. They made a 1.4 second improvement from FP1 to FP2, and Red Bull only made a 0.2 improvement from FP1 to FP2. However, flipping this on its head, we look at FP2 to FP3, and it is Red Bull who gained the most, 1.4 seconds, with Alfa Tauri actually losing 2.5 tenths of a second, Alfa Romeo a tenth, and Mercedes only moving forward just 0.03 of a second. Now, this is just worked out by mushing all of the drivers' times together in their one team and then picking the 2 fastest times in each of the 2 sessions as a siren whizzes past my flat. So all the 2 fastest times from the session, or from FP1, FP2 and FP3, are compared against each other regardless of which driver set that time. But now the thing we have all been waiting for, the teammate breakdowns for practice, and we move on into Mercedes to take a look at their panels. So we can see their FP1, FP2 and FP3 positions throughout the season on the left, and they've actually dropped a little bit back in FP3 so far, whereas FP2 and FP1 they made steps forward. And in the progression, they both followed similar progressions, although Bottas did have a big drop-off from FP2 to FP3, with Hamilton being the only one to gain. But interestingly, Bottas still has a stranglehold in FP1 in terms of the head-to-head in the bottom middle graph. It's 1 apiece in FP2, and then 2-0 to Hamilton in FP3. But then looking at the gaps chart in the top right, it is only marginal for Valtteri Bottas over Lewis Hamilton in FP1 and FP2, whereas it was a 4/10 gap in FP3 in favour of Lewis Hamilton, which, comparing those to the averages overall, it's a little bit down on what he had so far in the first 2 rounds by just a tenth, whereas Valtteri Bottas, again, his margin over Lewis Hamilton in FP1 has come down also. And from Mercedes, we take a look at Red Bull, and once again, this is vaguely dominated towards Max Verstappen, although Sergio Perez did actually outperform him in FP2, but bear in mind, Max Verstappen did have those technical issues in FP2, so it should have really been a whitewash for Max Verstappen in terms of the head-to-head. It's currently 2-0 in FP1 and 2-0 in FP3 as well. And taking a look at the gaps up top, it is 1.6 seconds was the difference in FP1, which is actually a little bit above his average so far this year. They were both fairly even so far in terms of being ahead of each other in FP2 across the season so far in just these 2 races. And then FP3, he's a little bit under his average from what we saw in Bahrain 3 weeks ago. And from Red Bull, we take a look at McLaren, and once again, they're fairly close. Not really, actually. Daniel Ricciardo is vaguely struggling, especially in FP2 and FP3. He is 0.8 down in both sessions on Lando Norris. This is not what you want to see going into qualifying. They are both following the same progression, so both cars are running the same programs, etc., same fuel loads and stuff like that, but it's just Daniel Ricciardo hasn't quite got an edge on that car, especially in FP2 as the head-to-head is 2-0. But taking a look at the averages across the whole season, it is Norris who has a little bit further advantage in FP2 across his average throughout this season. And from McLaren, we take a look at Aston Martin and the team that honestly I am a little bit disappointed in. They really are struggling. In Bahrain, they lost an average of 1.6 seconds per lap during the Grand Prix, and it's not looking like they're going to have a fun experience here in Imola this weekend. But it was absolutely dominated by Lance Stroll this session. On average, he's about 0.3 quicker than Sebastian Vettel in all 3 sessions combined, and he maintains a clean sweep in FP2 and FP3 in the head-to-head battle. But from Aston Martin, we head on in to Alpine, and it is Fernando Alonso who takes his revenge back on Esteban Ocon in practice, as he was absolutely demolished in Bahrain 3 weeks ago, whereas he is now 0.9 up in FP1. But bear in mind, Ocon did have that small coming together with Sergio Perez, although we had no video footage of it. However, Esteban Ocon does keep up his FP2 record. It is 2-0 in the head-to-head battle in that session. And from Alpine, we take a look at the Scarlet Ferraris, and it's actually Charles Leclerc who has a little bit of an advantage over Carlos Sainz, rather than the other way round that it was 3 weeks ago, apart from a monumental half a second gap in the second FP2 session. Now, I will agree, the red and the dark red colours in the head-to-head battles are a little bit hard to see, especially for me, as I'm actually a little bit on the colourblind side, but it is 2-0 towards Charles Leclerc in FP1, 2-0 in favour of Carlos Sainz in FP2, and then 1 apiece in FP3. And from Ferrari, we then take a look at Alfa Tauri, and once again, Yuki Tsunoda is being a touch on the inconsistent side, like we saw in the Bahrain practice progression, but it is Pierre Gasly who is once again dominating the session, very similar to the way that Max Verstappen is so far dominating over Sergio Perez. But again, this is to be expected. Yuki Tsunoda is in his rookie season, getting used to the car, getting used to the sport, as is Sergio Perez in getting used to a brand new team. And from one Alfa team, we head on into the second, and that is Alfa Romeo, and it is actually Antonio Giovinazzi this time who is leading the sessions in practice so far, apart from practice 1 where it is 1 apiece, like it is now 1 apiece in FP3, but 2-0 in favour of the Italian in FP2, and looking at the gaps, he had a 0.7 advantage over Kimi Raikkonen in FP2 this session, which, comparing to his average over the season so far, it is 0.3 up, so he actually had a better FP2 this time out in Imola than he has so far across this season. And then we head to the penultimate team, and that is Haas. And surprisingly, in FP1, the session in which Mazepin spun twice within the first 5 minutes and the last 5 minutes, he was actually 6.5 tenths up on Mick Schumacher. However, Schumacher managed to come back and on average was about 7 to 8 tenths faster across the 2 sessions, keeping up his head-to-head battle. It is 2-0 in FP2 and FP3 in favour of the German. However, the car does look like an absolute shambles to drive. It looks absolutely abysmal, even in Mick Schumacher's capable hands, unlike Nikita Mazepin's uncapable hands. The car just doesn't look very happy in the slightest, so we'll have to wait and see what happens with Haas. And then finally, in today's practice edition of the Race Weekend Data Analysis, we take a look at Williams. And surprisingly, it was Nicholas Latifi that was leading the Williams pair, on average by about 2 tenths of a second in FP1 and FP2, the first time this season that he has led George Russell so far. But FP3 he slipped back a little bit with that little mistake and a dink into the barriers, so perhaps he didn't get as much running in as George Russell did near the end, but a tenth up in favour of George Russell in FP3, which is about 2 tenths down on his average that he's holds so far across this season. And comparing that to the averages for Nicholas Latifi, it's the first time he's been in front, so we just pop the averages up for the moment. And there we go, there is the practice edition of today's Race Weekend Data Analysis all done and dusted. I'll aim to upload this just after qualifying, and then hopefully I can get the qualifying video out either later this evening, depends on when I manage to record it and edit it, or it will be out first thing tomorrow morning before the Grand Prix, and then the race edition will come out Tuesday-ish, maybe Monday. Again, depends on how quickly I can crunch all of the data, record the video, and edit it, etc. There will then be a couple of smatterings of other videos in there, like the 1.5 championship, the standardized championship as well, and of course my rankings and opinions as well, which you guys can get involved with come Sunday. There will be a little poll which you can get involved with to rank each of the drivers 1 through to 20. But that's all I've got for you today, guys. I hope you have enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next episode with whatever and whenever I decide to make it. I'll see you guys then.